in particular with Sauron. We see him first in Jack Lowden, I think is the actor's name. This is how the show starts. Again, it's like a prequel to a prequel show. Morgoth was defeated, the big bad of this universe, and Sauron is trying to convince the orcs, convince everyone here, and Adar is there as well, to convince them to follow him. So he comes across as very much like a politician-esque, like he's trying to gain support from the orcs and get them to follow him. He doesn't seem very sure of himself. He comes off as almost like Lord Farquaad-esque, and he starts to like say that men view you as ugly and corrupted, and they don't view you as a race, but follow me. A lot of you will die, but I can do great things for you. He doesn't come across as very sure of himself, or he's not garnering any sort of respect or authority. I honestly think this was a miscast, in my opinion, and I like this actor. I've seen him in Slow Horses. I don't know if anyone here has seen it. It's a show on Apple TV Plus. It's about like the misfits of some secret agency. He's okay in that. Gary Oldman's amazing in that show. But when I saw him in that show and I heard that he was cast as an early form of Sauron, I just didn't get it. Okay. And also, I just think it's a disservice to how they depicted Sauron here. And also, when he's standing next to Adar, which Adar's kind of cool. The way they depict him, the way his character's been written, like he's interesting. Which is a shame because he's an original creation and Sauron's kind of playing second fiddle to him. He's the one that's garnering respect and authority from the orcs, and he's the one that looks cool. And Sauron here, I'm not really into his outfit, but that's not really the problem. I just think his whole personality here was just coming across as desperate, and that's just not how we think of Sauron. When we read about him, he doesn't seem like he's the right-hand man of Morgoth. He seems very weak. He does not come across as a malevolent force. And so they do this kind of thing where he's like Ceasared, they rebel against him. Adar like kills him with his crown. He strikes the first blow and all the other orcs are just joining in then. And later in these episodes, we see elves and other characters talk about how insidious Sauron is. They talk about how deceptive he is, how he just gets into your heart and your soul and your head and manipulates you. They speak of him with such gravitas and that he would have such menace to him. And the way they actually depict him, I don't get that. It's like the writers are at war with that concept of Sauron. Like, do we want him to be formidable or not? They mostly just say, the characters just say how formidable he is, but they don't show it. Certain moments, maybe it gets better, but this is the way you're going to start off season 2. I'm actually surprised because I think season 1, the pilot, had a much better opening. They teased the beginning of creation, they teased the first age before that in the light of the two trees, they teased Morgoth, and they teased these huge battles. It was very well done. It was epic and very action filled and dramatic. And I'm just surprised that they decided to start season 2 with that. I thought this was going to be bigger, bolder, badder, deeper, darker, and I don't get the sense of that in this first episode. I just feel like this was a miscast. I always pictured someone like Lee Pace, who did an amazing Thranduil, but that's the kind of energy I would have pictured for Sauron in his fair form. But even before that, like Sauron in a more malevolent fashion, struck fear. And the way they decided to depict him, I did get none of that sense of how formidable and malevolent and evil he is. If he can't command respect from the orcs here, I just immediately following this, okay, so he becomes a puddle of goo. And this is how they depict his shape-shifting. I don't know why they thought this was a good idea. That's what came to their minds when they do a shape-shifting powers, because it seems like whatever he consumes, he becomes. So once he dies, once he's killed in this form and then sets off this winter landscape, he becomes this puddle, and then a rat just happens to like crawl next to his puddle and he consumes it. So he's able to crawl a bit more eventually out of the mountain. And okay, I did laugh. I laughed. When I saw this, my brain went to Venom. Why? Why does Sauron look like Venom? Well, and at least Venom looked cool and menacing in that form, parasitic form. This does not look formidable. He's literally flopping down the mountain. And what would have happened if the rat never came along? If that's how his shape-shifting power works, if nothing, no form of life came down his way, would he have just been sitting there in a puddle for eons? I mean, just the odds of that happening. So if that's dependent on how he shapeshift, it's dependent on other forms of life to come upon him who he consumes, then it's just a big coincidence that that rat just happened to go down there and check him out and to be consumed by him. Yes, because Maya aren't essentially spiritual beings and turn into goo when their corporeal forms are destroyed. Their spirits certainly ooze like venom in the lore. Yeah, it's just that's not how I pictured it. I definitely would have pictured him having much more agency in regards to his shapeshifting, because it really just seems, at least how they portrayed it, that it just is solely dependent on whatever form of life happens upon him, that he happens to come into contact with. So it really just doesn't seem like he has the power, I guess, necessary to shapeshift on his own volition. The whole ooze thing didn't work for Sauron. He is not simply some ooze that you scrape off of your shoe. It was almost demeaning, and the whole scene did nothing to escalate the stakes and threat. Like I was saying before, I feel like we're just told by the characters how menacing Sauron is, how insidious his deceptions are. We're just told that. But what we're seeing doesn't really indicate that. And even when it comes to his fair form, Anatar, who I guess they negotiated the rights to use the name, but even in that form, his deceptions, just simple forms of flattery, are all he needs to get by. And that's it. Again, we're just told like all these platitudes about how bad Sauron is, but all we're seeing is just your baseline compliment someone to grease the wheels there to get what you want. It's very simple, and it really just relies on other characters to be stupid for his deceptions to work, to not ask questions, to not think, maybe, to not use their brains. That's a major problem here with trying to weaken the villains, make them sympathetic or make them relatable in some way. And it really just also diminishes your heroes because you don't really feel any sense of them overcoming this immense obstacle and challenges when the villain itself is very diminished. Yeah, I wasn't a fan of making them goo. They're spiritual beings. First, you see this huge like energy blast out of Sauron upon his death. And then his blood just oozes out of his former being down the mountain, collects in a puddle. I don't know what they were thinking with this. I feel like they could have done something really cool, but at every opportunity to do something cool, they choose to go the boring route. I can't believe they just watched this. How many years did this take to produce? 2 years? So many people watched this and okayed it and thought that this was a proper depiction of Sauron. I could probably think of a lore-friendly way to explain it, but this doesn't deserve it. I just expected more. I expected something cooler, something to establish how powerful Sauron is. I mean, you spent so long, like all of last season, talking about Sauron and where is he? He's doing something. We don't know where he is. He's all this time Galadriel is talking about Sauron and on the hunt for him. He's literally just flopping down a mountainside as this little like goo teddy bear. He's the size of a teddy bear flopping down a mountain. And I don't know what this even is. He flopped on top of this rock just so he could fall over. They approved this footage. They saw this footage and thought, yeah, that's acceptable. It's also just not a very good scene / section / story. I think the entire thing could be cut. We don't need to know how Sauron gets there. Why do we need to know how Halbrand met Galadriel? This doesn't tell us crucial information that we just needed to know in order to move on from here. Basically, it was just that scene with him trying to get the orc support and failing, and then literally him just falling down this mountain and how he gets to be Halbrand and how he meets Galadriel. But do we need any of that? I mean, there's another way that you could have conveyed what happened with Sauron and Adar and the orcs. There's another way you could have depicted that. Maybe through Adar and his recollection, I don't know. But most of it was just him being this puddle of goo until he happens to be run over by this random woman in a carriage and it turns into Halbrand. It's so comical. I should not be laughing at Sauron, and this is the only time I was even remotely entertained. I should also say that. At least this made me laugh. I don't think that should have ever been the intention, but here we are. But at least that was something, because the rest of it is so boring. It was really hard to get through, but I did it. I did it for y'all. Oh yeah, and he wears her clothes. That's interesting. He consumes the woman and comes out like wearing her clothes. And he happens upon this random old man who just starts speaking again in platitudes about like, oh, any person can change their fate or something like that. No matter how powerful you are, you can change your life. It's so out of place that he bumps into this old man who just starts like monologuing to him. Like, people don't talk to each other this way. It makes some sense for Sauron to be running around in this time frame, I believe, just not like this. And when you think about it, you think about what was going on in season 1, how Galadriel was like all over the map trying to find him, and and now we know where he was this whole time. He was flopping down a mountainside.